Okay, here we're going to look at circulation on this model and then one other model, and we're just going to look at the major branches of the arterial and venous systems. So right here, I'm going to start with the heart coming up from the chest. So your heart is here. Here's your right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. We know that deoxygenated blood returning to the right atrium will go into the right ventricle, from there into the pulmonary trunk, and then into the left and right pulmonary arteries. And they're shown in blue here because they're carrying oxygen-poor blood. Most arteries are red because they're oxygen-rich. Most veins are blue because they're oxygen-poor. So this is the only time in adult circulation you'll see blue arteries and red veins. So as the CO2 leaves the body at the lungs and the lungs transfer O2 into the blood, now we have these pulmonary veins in red. And so you have pulmonary veins from the left and right lungs returning to the heart into this, the left atrium in the posterior. So there are your right and left pulmonary veins. From there, the blood goes from the left atrium to the left ventricle, through the aortic semilunar valve into the ascending aorta, and this is the aortic arch. And then through these three arterial branches coming off the aortic arch, the first three branches of arteries coming off the aorta. So this first one right here is the brachiocephalic trunk. It's running behind this left brachiocephalic vein. And right about here, it will divide into the right common carotid. You can see it right there. And it also divides into the right subclavian. You can see right here. Right subclavian artery. The very next branch coming off the aortic arch is the left common carotid. You see it coming up here in red, going up to feed the brain. And then the very next branch is the left subclavian artery. You'll see it coming over here to feed the left arm. So these left and right common carotids go up to feed the brain, and then veins will drain areas of the body. They're going to return that deoxygenated blood to the heart and through the pulmonary circuit that we just described. So these are your internal jugular veins coming down from the head, and they're going to meet up with these left and right subclavian veins, forming these left and right brachiocephalic veins. And then those will form the superior vena cava, returning blood to the heart from the superior aspects of the body, the upper limbs, the head, portions of the thoracic area. Goes through the pulmonary circuit back to the heart, left ventricle, into the aorta. We've already described these three, but now that aorta is going to turn downward. So remove the heart, pan down. The heart's been removed from right here, but you can see the thoracic aorta or descending aorta. That will then travel down through the diaphragm that we can see right here, and it becomes the abdominal aorta, right? The abdominal aorta. This first branch here is the celiac trunk, and it's really no bigger than a pencil eraser, and then it immediately branches into a splenic artery, a gastric artery to feed the stomach, and a hepatic artery that feeds the liver. The next branch off the abdominal aorta is this. That's the superior mesenteric. It's going to go on and feed most of the small intestine. Also coming off the abdominal aorta, you have a left renal artery right here, and a right renal artery right here. The abdominal aorta then continues down, and right here it ends as it branches into the left common iliac and the right common iliac arteries. And they are the iliac arteries until we pass below this inguinal ligament, about the level of your iliac bone. And now you have the femoral artery on each side. Those are feeding the legs. Draining the legs are the femoral veins. I mean, there's a lot more vascularization below, but we're not describing all that. So we'll pick it up right here. The femoral veins on each side will then pass through that inguinal ligament again and become the common iliac veins, and those will come together forming the inferior vena cava. Along the way, it'll pick up the left renal vein and the right renal vein, go up through the diaphragm now, And right there, it would enter into the right atrium. So if I put the heart back in there, it would come up through here into the right atrium again, back to the heart. And everything we just described would happen all over again. So there's just a quick, simple look at circulation, and we're going to see this coming up in just a second in yet another model. Okay, so here's a small model of the human body replicating all the vessels that we discussed in the previous model. And again, here you can see the heart, it's opened up, so you can see the right atrium, the right ventricle, left atrium, the chordae tendineae from both the tricuspid and bicuspid valves. You can even see the pulmonary semilunar valve here, going to the pulmonary trunk, and then those pulmonary arteries would go to the left and right lungs. Drop off CO2, pick up O2 through the pulmonary veins in red, both sides, and dump back into the left atrium, left ventricle, and then through the aortic semilunar valve and up the ascending aorta. There's that aortic arch again. There's your brachiocephalic trunk running behind the left brachiocephalic vein, and it would divide into the right common carotid and right subclavian arteries. Next branch, left common carotid artery in red, and the next branch, the left subclavian artery. When it passes that first rib, it becomes the axillary artery and then the brachial artery. Then we get the descending aorta. It will pass then through the diaphragm, just as we saw before. Let's slide this up just a little bit. And here's your abdominal aorta now, and it will come down and branch into the right and left common iliac arteries. And again, once it crosses this inguinal ligament, there's your iliac bone. It becomes the femoral artery, and then returning, you'd have the femoral veins on each side. And again, above the inguinal ligaments, they are the iliac veins. Just as these were the common iliac arteries until they pass below, these are the common iliac veins once we're above that inguinal ligament. And they'll come together and form the inferior vena cava and back to the heart. As mentioned in the previous model, coming off that abdominal aorta, we have the left and right renal arteries, and then returning from the kidneys, we have the left and right renal veins. If you look at the spleen here, and of course the stomach and the intestines are missing, but you can see that splenic artery coming off the celiac trunk. You can see the hepatic artery coming off the celiac trunk, and this would be the gastric right there. But then you see this splenic vein returning, and it's purple. And the veins here are purple, and here, again, those are all going to form this hepatic portal vein coming from all of the intestines and going into the liver, where, once again, it'll regulate the food products in our blood. And then these two are hepatic veins. So the purple is hepatic portal vein, the blue are the hepatic veins, and those will empty into the inferior vena cava and return to the heart. Up here, we have the internal jugulars again, the left and right subclavian veins, and they're going to form the brachiocephalic veins, superior vena cava, into the right atrium, and so on. So there is just another way of looking at all your systemic circulation. Even the pulmonary we included here. So just a couple of different models to look at showing the same major vessels. That is it for the circulatory system.